Michael, can you hear me? I'm testing the microphones. Can you hear me? Are we coming through? Yep. So, looks like we're up. Oh, should be. Oh, yeah.
room. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during this meeting. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to say a few words about a soon-to-retire Susan Harding Cruz. Susan will be retiring on May 31st, 2018, after 31 years of service to the City of Hamilton. Susan began her career with Public Health Services as a public health inspector in 1987, and in 1995 she became a supervisor in the Environmental Health Branch, during which time Public Health Services faced the advent of food disclosure, Walkerton, West Nile virus in quick succession, and in 2010, Susan became the manager of Public Health Services' Vector-Borne Disease Program, where she continued to manage and oversee rabies, West Nile virus, tick surveillance, pest complaints. It's been you've got all the bugs, pest complaints, city council bugs, inspection of residential care facilities, and other care housing inspections. So congratulations to Susan on your imminent retirement. Congratulations. Well done. On that note, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda, please?
We have no changes to today's agenda.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Connolly, seconded by Vanderbeek. All in favor? Are there any declarations of interest? Hearing none. Approval of the minutes of February 22nd. Moved by Partridge, seconded by Green. All in favor? Carried. On item 5.1, consent items. A motion to receive item 5.1, Food Advisory Committee minutes. Moved by Connolly, seconded by Green. All in favor? Carried. 5.2, Oral Health. A motion to receive, Councillor Vanderbeek, seconded by Councillor Farr. All in favor? Food Waste Reduction. 5.3, a motion by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Marula to approve. All in favor? Carried. And on 5.4, Infectious Disease Environmental Health Semi-Annual Report. Here we are. Did I miss you on an item? Okay.
On the food waste reduction report, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am. 5.3.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, I'm not sure who authored the report, started reading, hang on, who I can ask. On page 6 of 8 in the report, I'm assuming these are recommendations. So recommendation 13 is saying to explore the feasibility, to expand programs to increase the use of composting in all settings. Can you just elaborate what you mean by composting in all settings? Like, is this in businesses? Is this in multi-units? I'm not sure.
All right.
Thank you for allowing me to just ask the question, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Hit the button there, and your name, please, if you could.
Through the chair, my name is Rafael Morello with Public Works. So the recommendation is related to encouraging the green bin program through all settings, so households, businesses, schools, city facilities.
So when we're saying composting, we mean the green bins. We're not meaning like compost pits in somebody's backyard or a business having we mean the use of the green carts.
Through the chair, yes, we mean green carts through those types of facilities, but we don't necessarily exclude residential properties continuing to use their backyard composter.
And I have no problem with that. Thank you, Rafael, for that. I just wanted to be sure that how we want to address it in possibly even multi-res if we have composting. It's wonderful. I have a compost in my backyard, and I have no problem with that and how people operate them. But when you start getting into multi-units or different things, there could be issues that we are now creating more problems to. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you very much for that indulgence.
Okay, thank you. You want to get your microphone there? Thanks. On 5.4 then, Infectious Disease Environmental Health Semi-Annual Report. To motion to receive, moved by Partridge, seconded by Vanderbeek. All in favor? Carried. And we have item 7.1, Lyme Disease Risk in Hamilton. Dr. Richardson, you are at least going to lead this off, and if there's any further presentation, you'll let us know. Dr. Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So indeed, we are have submitted the information through to Public Health Ontario and have met their criteria to say that Hamilton is a Lyme risk area. Susan's going to take us through this being her last meeting while she's here at Hamilton Public Health. She's actually going to do a presentation today and go through the data behind it and what it means for us here in Hamilton. So I'll hand it over to Susan.
Terrific, thank you. I was going to say, you really need to come to the big podium for the final presentation, Susan. Let's get the cameras ready. Yeah, that microphone needs to go on. Just 1 second. We want to hear every word, Susan. There we go.
So I'll just repeat that because I think it's completely true. You were saying what would I say? Would I say the truth? And I said for June 1st, I would say I'm very grateful and thankful for my career here. It's been a great honor and privilege to serve the community. So if we can turn our attention to, and I haven't done this one here, so I'm not sure, does this just work the same way? Oh, terrific. I'll just do this. Okay. Okay, so what you're looking at is Hamilton's new estimated risk area. The 20-kilometer zone around the city, you can see that that covers 3/4 of the city, except for areas of Stony Creek and Glanbrook. So anything within this area is considered a Lyme disease risk area. So how did we get to this stage? So looking at this map, this is of the United States, and the reason it's called Lyme disease, it was first identified in Lyme, Connecticut in 1975. And over time, through climate change and change in temperature and tick movement north, you can see with the blue dots that those are all actually human cases as of 2016. You can see it covers a great portion of the northeastern part of the United States. So as expected, when it was found in Lyme, Connecticut, through climate change, we have seen a prediction model. This is from Public Health Agency of Canada, where by 2020, if you see on the right-hand side, you can see that province of Ontario, the projections are that north of Thunder Bay by 2020, which years ago seemed to be far away, but it's now two years away, the projections were that Lyme disease would be a risk area all the way north of Thunder Bay. So we're down here in Hamilton near Lake Ontario. We're certainly in the zone of an expected tick abundance and Lyme disease. So the projections that Public Health Agency of Canada had posted and had expected are coming true. You can see the difference between 1991 and 2000 and where we are at 2018, heading to 2020. What this means is that this is really not a surprise. We have been expecting that through climate change that tick habitat would move into Ontario and that we would at some point become an estimated risk area. So that has occurred. So Public Health Agency of Canada and Public Health Ontario have a methodology for determining an area as an estimated risk area. Previous terms that we would use more often would be endemic, but we've taken a step back from being endemic, and we're first looking at becoming first an estimated risk area. So we're not endemic yet, but we are considered a risk area. In order to come up to be an estimated risk area, you have to participate in what's called active dragging. It's really a stick and a blanket, and you're walking through areas you expect to find these ticks, and you have spent a number of hours going through and actually looking for these black-legged ticks. You don't move to active dragging until you have found some ticks through passive submission, so having the community submit ticks, and also looking to see that you've got some patterns of black-legged ticks over time, as well as looking at your human case information coming in. So leading up to 2016, we didn't have the criteria yet to move to active dragging. So we weren't out there looking for them actively until 2016. And then last year in 2017, we had to do what's called this dragging, where you have to try and capture black-legged ticks at 2 times of the year between May and September, so in the spring and in the fall. You have to find the black-legged ticks in the spring and the fall of the same year and at the same location in order to be considered an estimated risk area. So all those needed to combine together. And so once you find them, we did find them in a location at the same time in spring and in fall. We found black-legged ticks in the same location in the same year last year. And so then you put a boundary around that of 20 kilometers. Because the reality is that it's not just going to be in that location where you found it. If you find them there spring and fall, it means the estimated area is going to be that 20-kilometer radius. So here's the areas that we looked at. And again, we don't just pick a site out of the air as to where we're going to look for these ticks. You want to base it on where you've had some reports of ticks, when we've had ticks brought in, and you look over time to see, maybe there's some patterning happening with the ticks. So we have these 3 areas that we dragged: Christie Lake Conservation Area, Borers Falls, and parts of the Royal Botanical Gardens, some of the trails that are near McMaster University. So the 3 locations that were done for spring and fall, Christie Conservation Area is where we found the 3 ticks. We found 3 in the spring and we found 3 in the fall. So that is our center of that 20-kilometer radius. In total, we had 7 other ticks collected from the 2 other sites, but they were not found in spring and fall, so Christie is the one location that met the key criteria. All of the ticks were sent for testing, and they were all negative for Lyme disease. Now, for passive ticks submitted, this is the other part of our program that continued. We've had passive submissions for a number of years now. Last year, we were overwhelmed with ticks. We had 892 ticks submitted. This is different species of ticks, not just black-legged ticks. The majority, and I'll stress, the majority of ticks were dog ticks, and dog ticks do not transmit Lyme disease. Okay. Locally, we had 118 black-legged ticks. The slide says 78 because 78 were sent for testing and confirmatory identification, because although our program is to receive ticks from our community and we really only want the ones found on people, if people have taken the time to drop in a tick and they found it on a trail or on their dog or just on their property, we will receive those too. So 78 were found on people. They were sent for Lyme disease testing. As of this presentation being created, we only had heard back that 4 were positive and 13 were pending, but now we've heard back and we have 8 positive and only 1 test remaining as pending. So this is the risk area map that Public Health Ontario makes every year. They tend to have it come out in the spring. All of the yellow zones are also estimated risk areas. The closest one to us is Niagara. It's Wainfleet Bog area, and again, always a 20-kilometer buffer around that area. So our city will be added to the April 2018 map. They're hoping to get it out in April, and it will have that zone that is on the map that we submitted. If there are other areas, everyone else is going through this same exercise, so anyone else who's done active dragging and found the same criteria, those areas will also be added. And you can see the majority are in eastern Ontario and along Lake Ontario, on Lake Erie. And that's our picture.
Thank you, and don't go away. We have a number of folks that want to ask questions. First one is Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and great presentation, a lot of good information, and this issue certainly isn't a new one for us. It's been around in the community for a while, and I know that our past efforts have focused around the education component, and I know we have a number of signs out in the community at certain locations, especially high traffic areas around natural areas, and my beach strip is one of those locations. And the beach strip along the trail is one of those locations where I have had calls and emails from residents stating that, I walk my dog through there, the dog's in the bushes, I come home and it has 5 or 6 ticks on it. And then there's certainly the human experience in terms of those people who walk out onto the sand to the lake. You're walking through some scrub brush, and some people have had ticks on them in that area. So that area is appropriately signed, and certainly people are still, through their animals and by themselves, are still experiencing ticks. And I just wonder, you've highlighted the areas that we test, and do we expand that knowing that the Lyme disease issue is more prevalent and possibly more of an issue for us locally than in the past? Knowing that, do we drag in certain areas to find out whether there are other hot spots, if you want to call that, in the community, or is it just we've done these test areas and that's sufficient to just know that we could be susceptible or we could have Lyme ticks in the community, and just knowing that it becomes just a community-wide educational site? So I'm sorry for the preamble there, but I wanted to explain myself.
Sarah, I think you did very well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So our passive surveillance will continue, where we're going to have people bring in ticks, continue to submit ticks. So that will still round out our information. We will again do active dragging this spring. The sites that would be selected, we would want to repeat the ones that we did, just for consistency, to see what we're finding year after year. But we would also look to expand depending on what ticks have come in and where they may be found. So we can look at our ticks from last year and see the different areas, and then to decide if there's some key other areas we need to do active tick dragging. As far as the signage, we certainly are, part of our plan is to look at expanding our signage. The signage that was in the community was to have a general awareness about ticks. It was not necessarily identifying specific spots where ticks were known to be, but were likely to be. So in any parks, anywhere people are congregating, trails, there's a chance they could be there, so that was an awareness. We also had bus ads of the same signage.
Okay, Councillor?
So is there a budget for that in terms of the signage that if we're expanding that, how are we doing that from a resource perspective? So I have it certainly on the waterfront trail. I have a number of natural areas through my ward. There's a lot of trail openings to Red Hill and Bruce Trail and other areas. Is there a way for us to contribute through resources that we have, or is there a sufficient budget within public health's budget to accommodate those requests?
Sarah?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would always be thankful for any extra resources that you may want to have come our way. We do have some budget for promotion in our vector-borne disease budget, and we'll be looking at what the signage costs might be and where some signage may go now that we're an estimated risk area. We also have, the province is also looking at generic, or I shouldn't say generic, consistent signage for Lyme disease. And we're not sure yet whether any signage would be provided to us in that way that would be for posting or not, so that's still being something we're looking into.
Great. Thanks for the information, and I can certainly follow up with staff with the suggested locations that I would have for my ward.
Great, thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So last year was clearly one of those high tick years in general. And I'm trying to understand the distinction. I mean, I have pictures of ticks on adjacent homeowners' properties and walkways and so forth. So how many different species of ticks are we dealing with in this area?
I'm not an entomologist, so I don't know the full extent, but I know we've got the American dog tick, we have the black-legged tick, we also have other forms, those are called, the black-legged tick is called Ixodes, and there are other Ixodes types. There's one called Ixodes cooki, and it's a squirrel tick. So we do have more than 2 types of ticks.
Appreciate that. Is there a correlation between the black-legged tick and the deer populations in this area?
There's an association with, that's why I think it's called the deer tick. There's an association with deer because the black-legged tick needs to feed on small mammals for the one round of feeding, and then they tend to go to the deer once they become adults and they're bigger, they can feed on deer. But the number of deer population, it's not a correlation.
So on where they are, there's not a correlation?
So they will feed on deer, and so they will be found where there are deer.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to know if I was mapping out where the clusters of our deer population are, how it would relate to some of the mapping and findings to date on the black-legged tick.
Well, the black-legged tick likes the habitat of wooded and trail areas and grasses. They need to be on those grassy areas, so that's where they would be found. And then, again, small rodents or mammals are what they like to feed on as well, so that's part of the species too.
Golf courses. Clearly, it's a vulnerability in regards to a population of ticks, whether it's the black-legged tick or not. Are golf courses an area that have come up in other jurisdictions as an area of concern with the black-legged tick?
Black-legged ticks, through you, Mr. Mayor, black-legged ticks don't like the open sun, anywhere that's dry and has open sunshine, so the mowed areas of the golf course should not be a concern. The edges where people may have their balls go and have to go grab them, those would be the areas, anything wooded.
Okay, I appreciate that. Is there anything else that the community should be concerned about in regards to the context here is Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. Is there any other concerns that the ticks can carry and transfer to human?
So the main concern is Lyme disease. Black-legged ticks do have a potential to carry anaplasmosis and another disease called babesiosis. One is a parasite and one is similar, it's a bacteria. The anaplasmosis is a bacteria. I will say that we did have one tick positive for anaplasmosis, and it was found on a trail. So yes, they can carry other diseases. That's why our main message is, just like West Nile, I've been up here before for West Nile, precautions thankfully are the same for any tick to follow. So really the idea is if you have a tick on you, it's to remove it properly and carefully, to remove the head part, the mouth parts, and also not to allow it to be on you too long, and to check yourselves for ticks. You can also use DEET. All the precautions are very similar, wearing long pants, wearing long shirts when you're walking in grassy areas.
The reason I asked that last question is I remember reading that there are issues of ticks now, and that might be already that viral or one of those other two categories you identified, that people are developing what's called an allergy to meat.
Right, the red meat. So as I understand it, that's connected to the Lone Star tick, and it's a sugar in the tick that when it feeds on you, it injects something with a sugar, and the sugar in red meat is the same. So if you've been infected through a Lone Star tick, then you could develop an allergy to red meat.
That's a Lone Star tick is not in our area at this time.
So in addition to the one tick that had the anaplasmosis, we did find, it's very rare, but through our active dragging, we did find one Lone Star tick. It was a male and it was negative.
Thank you.
Thank you. If one wanted to know all about ticks, where would one go?
To an entomologist.
Do we have any explanation on our website?
We do have, yes, it was through you, Mr. Mayor. We do have information on Lyme disease. Now that we're an estimated risk area, we're certainly going to be looking at our website and seeing what other information needs to be added. So we've already explained the American dog tick and the black-legged tick, but we could add the other ticks and the diseases.
Might be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, Brenda Johnson.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. This is wonderful. Do you mind going back to your very first map? I believe it's slide 2. Oh, sorry. Okay, so while that's happening, it's my understanding that, as you said before, long grass, is a culprit, and people need to be careful. If you take a look at the center of that circle and go down to the right a little bit, that's North Glanbrook, which is north of 20 Road. And I can tell you that I know of 2 people so far that have been diagnosed. It's high population for seniors, but it backs onto the hydro corridor, which is not maintained. We also have people that live around our swim ponds in the new development. So we've got nice long grass. It looks absolutely beautiful, but it's now surrounded by residential. So those are two perfect spots for ticks to breed and live. On top of the education piece, how can we be proactive in asking Public Works or asking Hydro to keep their corridors cut down so that this, especially when they're up against residential, that's the part that really is frustrating for me, because people can't go out in their own backyards, which they keep manicured and groomed, and yet they've got this 5-foot length grass at the end of their fence, and so it's just a matter of hopping onto their family dog and away they go.
Sarah?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the City of Hamilton, when we knew that ticks were likely to be moving into this area, we did consider having a tick management plan, so that's being formed. We have a committee that's been meeting for a number of months now to bring together this idea of what can be done proactively as far as maybe some urban design for our parks and trails, because you can have some separated areas. As far as responding to complaints like property that's not our own, we can take a look at what the issue is and see whether they have a plan for the hydro corridor. Do they have something where for ecology reasons, they want to have the long grasses for some reason? So we can take a look at it to see whether or not any controls can be put in place that way. One of the things that we do have to do as a community and in Ontario is kind of face the facts that the ticks are here, and there is a Lyme disease risk, and that really the major way to control it or prevent disease is personal precautions, taking the personal precautions. So we can respond to the complaints and see what's possible, but ultimately unfortunately this disease, it needs to be prevented through personal measures.
And thank you for that. And I'm really glad to hear there's a group up ahead. I suspect the hydro corridor is mainly because maintenance is free, so if you don't have to cut it. So if I would kindly suggest that this group take a look at, and this is something that we've been in the works for a while, and we've actually presented it to the Ag and Rural group, that any properties in the rural area that are not used for agriculture must have a 20-foot strip mowed down around the perimeter. So that in itself will help that there's the hydro corridor, because most of these places I'm talking about are in the rural areas, not so much the urban. And the same with the swim ponds. We have fields backing on to properties that have not been used agriculturally for 20, 30 years. They're just sitting there because the developer is speculating or it's land banking. And now we've got this tick problem in a small settlement area. And it may not be because of Lyme disease, or it may not be because the mosquitoes are West Nile, but it's still a nuisance. So I'm hoping that you can at least take a look at if there's any proactive means that we can do so that this circle either becomes smaller or disappears, especially in the rural areas.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, did you want to answer any of that? I think it was a rhetorical question.
I think through you, Mr. Mayor, we can certainly take that back to the group that's meeting and have discussion about that.
Great.
Thank you, because it's really upsetting, like when the residents sit there and say that this is city-owned property, it's 20 feet of grass sitting on the other side. It's very frustrating for the residents, especially when it's city-owned property and we're not doing anything because we've deemed it natural. And it's very frustrating for them to deal with this nuisance when it can be easily done just by a swatch of grass separating that property to the residential property, and then at least it takes that risk proportion of it, pull it away from the residential. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I apologize, Susan. I've been calling you Sarah. I don't know why, but My apologies. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good presentation. And so, just to reiterate, did I hear you say 8 have been tested so far?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so 8 have been found to be positive
Right.
through Lyme disease testing.
Okay, and thank you. And so, where were those ticks from?
So those ticks were from within the 20-kilometer radius. They were, the 8 ticks were from people handing them in from the community.
Right.
And so they were from within, so you can just see here, I know where 7 of them were, but not the 8th. That one just came in. 5 were from the Dundas area, and 2 were from Glanbrook area.
Okay, so 5 Dundas and 2 Glanbrook.
Yes.
Well, and similar to the previous speaker, you know, we have quite a bit of open natural space, particularly in one in Waterdown that comes to mind that is, you know, part of the city's responsibility. And it does have a trail system that has been built through it. And it's been a concern of mine. You know, Saturday, we went for a hike through Joe Sam's Park. Good signage there to do with the ticks. Most people are keeping their dogs on leash, but still, they're wandering into the high grass and that area. And it's been a concern of mine that, you know, in these open spaces, are we putting signage up? I see it at Joe Sam's Park, but in an open space that has a trail that is not identified as a park, are we putting signage up there as well?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, becoming an estimated risk area kind of raises our risk for locally. So before, when we had the signage, it was to raise awareness that there are ticks. Most of them are dog ticks. This is what they kind of look like. Try to get used to this is what ticks look like. Now that we're an estimated risk area, we're going to need to go back to the committee and decide where are the areas that may need signage. And also our awareness to the community generally. How are we going to get this message out about taking personal precautions and, you know, walking on trails, that type of thing, what kind of habits people may have to adapt to.
And will the committee, will an information report be coming back to the Board of Health once the committee has finalized their strategies?
Certainly through you, Mr. Mayor, if that's the request, then an information report could come back, certainly.
I think it would be important. I don't know whether I need to move a motion or whether it can be just taken as direction, but you know, I think the Lyme disease, and it's a horrible disease. It's debilitating, and if it has a presence in our city, and we need to be aware of it, then I think, you know, as a council, as a Board of Health, we need to keep on top of it and just be aware of the areas that are most affected. When it comes to the education component, and if I understand you correctly, your committee is just now starting to work on how that educational component will be promoted?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the committee has been talking more about 2 proactive measures about building and design, like things for parks and trails, and what could be, if we're going to build something new, how could it reduce the number of ticks. But our own public health group will be looking at messaging and making a communication plan.
All right, thank you. And finally, the messaging around, you know, particularly for owners of pets. Are we looking at doing that as a part of it, separate component? Just how are we going to get that message out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thankfully with Public Health have been partnering with the veterinary community through something called One Health for a number of years. So already our tick ID card speaks to pets, and so we're always in constant communication. Also, because of raccoon rabies, we have a good, close relationship with vets in our community, so they are part of our partners. They're not at that table for the committee. Right now the committee is mainly internal, but we certainly are reaching out to them.
Well, Susan, thank you for your great presentation. I hope everyone, you know, absorbs it, not only around this table, but certainly in the council chambers. There's been good questions being asked and certainly good answers being given. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Susan. Could you maybe provide for us what the ticks actually look like the difference between the black-legged, the regular tick? I think I've seen those kind of signs, Mr. Mayor, up on front of maybe some of our trails and parks, but I didn't see anything as part of your presentation, Susan.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I have to apologize to my staff for cutting out that slide to be as short as I could with the presentation. The tick signs show the American dog tick and the black-legged tick. Black-legged tick is smaller than the American dog tick. One thing to keep in mind is they kind of look like little spiders. They've got 8 legs. The black-legged tick, the female has a reddish body. Her abdomen is a reddish color, whereas the dog tick has a mottled cream and brown coloring on its back. Certainly on our website, if you have the internet here, we can go right on site and you could look at our Lyme disease page to see our sign and the differences.
Could you provide that for our offices too, please? The pictures of the 2 main distinctions of those ticks, please, Susan?
Yes, definitely.
And secondly, what's the main symptoms once one has Lyme, and can it be potentially fatal, Mr. Mayor? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I deal with the surveillance side of things, so I can speak briefly to human illness unless Dr. Richardson would like to, or...
So who wants to speak to the health issues, actually?
Yes.
Yep, I just want to know what symptoms are and potentially fatal, Mr. Mayor. The Dr. Tran, Dr. Richardson, whoever.
Symptoms of Lyme disease. Dr. Trent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's different stages that Lyme disease goes through. There's what's called the early localized disease, disseminated disease, that can be early or late. So in general, what you see are, it starts off within the first month of flu-like symptoms of sort of fatigue, fever, chills, headaches, arthralgia, myalgia. So it can be a little bit difficult to differentiate, but then as it continues on, you might see lesions on the skin that could be simple, something like a target lesion, which is the classic. And if it progresses, if it left untreated early on, it can affect different body parts and organs such as the neurological system, cardiac, and muscle. So having some nerve damage, some damage to the heart, as well as some arthritis, which is why it can be a very debilitating disease later, which is one of the reasons why when we found this out, we further did some communications to our physicians to let them know that we're now an estimated risk area, how to diagnose and treat for this, and to remind them that treatment is based on, need to be early based on clinical judgment. Here's what to look for rather than waiting for the tests. But as you can tell, it can range from something that's very mild, that's flu-like if it's caught early, and that's that, but it can be, as one of the other counselors mentioned earlier, quite debilitating if it affects the nerve.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Dr. Tran. Dr. Tran, as like Susan, could you possibly, that summary you just sent out, starting with flu-like symptoms to what it could become more seriously, do you mind at least sending that to my office so that I can have that, if readily necessary, and to be available? Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks very much, Susan. In reading a number of articles online, Toronto, a couple of years back, has identified certain areas, and they're I guess, erecting signs in those areas just to forewarn people. Is there any jurisdiction that has perhaps been a little bit more aggressive and tried to use some sort of environmentally friendly chemical to deal with it, or some way of fumigating certain areas, those areas that we determined to be somewhat problematic? Through you, Mr. Susan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in Ontario, we don't have a pesticide for tick control in that kind of measure. There is some personal use that you can have on private properties, but not for commercial use.
So it's legislation that would prevent it?
Legislation would prevent it.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, is that as a result of it being somewhat unfriendly environmentally?
From what I understand, Mr. Mayor, it's the appetite for companies to bring it to Canada or to Ontario. The market just hasn't been here.
But if municipalities were to pursue it, then the market would probably be created.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a potential. Certainly we could talk to the Ministry of Environment about the pesticide or the Pest Management Regulatory Authority for Canada. They are very restrictive about what comes in, and it can take a number of years if there even is a market interest, but there is a potential.
From my point of view, Mr. Mayor, if public health signs off on it, and there isn't a downside environmentally, that's something perhaps we could consider. At the appropriate time, I'd like to find out in more detail whether or not that we can study that just to determine feasibility in the future in the event that Lyme disease and or the tick problem becomes far more problematic down the road. So at the appropriate time, I'll move a motion accordingly.
Okay, I'll come back to you on that. Councillor Pearson, further questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Susan, for the presentation, an excellent one. And as a person who camps, I very well know what to keep an eye out for. I did want to ask, and I want to thank Councillor Brenda Johnson for raising the issue as well as, the stormwater management ponds and things like that. And I appreciate that right now, is this tick management plan in development right now, or is it developed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's in development. The original goal was to have it done by spring. We've just had some delays in that, so we expect that a plan will be ready soon. I won't be here to finish that up, but I think the team will carry on.
Soon being second quarter?
I would think second quarter would be a good goal.
Great. And is this team working with the planning department?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, definitely. Cynthia Graham is a key player and participant. We also have health and safety for internal staff. And we have recently met with RBG as well and Hamilton Conservation.
Those were my next questions, and I appreciate that, because I too, on the same lines, I've had developments where staff wanted to try and keep some wild habitat. So they actually had the developers plant wild plantings, which have now, the residents aren't happy because it's created problems. You've got perfectly manicured areas, black chain link fence, and then it's all wild growth, which is on a pathway as well. So this plan, as you're saying, may end up addressing that going forward. So we'll have to see how this report comes ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would add that we are looking for a balance to be struck, though, with still naturalized areas, because if you don't have naturalized areas in a community, it can lead to an imbalance of other pests possibly coming in.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Second time, Councillor Whitehead.
Can I just suggest, I mean, I know that there is a device that can facilitate taking the tick off from your body. It's just a little plastic device, if I recall. I remember seeing it advertised. It's probably like, 1,000 for, 20 cents. I mean, I don't know what they are. But for a promotional and educational piece, I'm just asking Public Health if we could take a look at maybe even providing those to residents in the areas that you've defined.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we had looked at tick ID, tick removal options. Some are actually quite expensive, and our budget is very limited at this stage. But again, if others want to offer any resources.
Again, I want to iterate it. I mean, I think about, in golf, they just hand out those little things for the golf, for the greens, because you buy them, a dozen for a dime. The ones I saw in the States were like little plastic, and they had a little clipper on it, and it pops the head. So
through you, Mr. Mayor, there are a lot of different items out there. It is an idea for a promotional idea. The issue is that if almost the whole city is an estimated risk area, so where, we have to look at scale and what's appropriate.
Fair enough. I think I was just using it as more of a educational tool, but here, by the way, here's something that will come useful. Thank you.
Thank you. The common tweezer would work?
A common tweezer would work.
Okay, thank you. So, no further questions. Councillor Maroon, you mentioned a motion. Oh, yeah, my bad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Move myself, seconded by Councillor Collins. Whereas the tick population in the city of Hamilton is rapidly growing, whereas the city of Hamilton has deemed to be a high-risk area for tick population, and by extension Lyme disease, whereas provincial legislation prevents public pesticide use to prevent tick population growth, whereas the producers of the tick pesticide do not consider Ontario a viable market as a direct result of the legislation. Therefore, be it resolved, the public health staff investigate the pros and cons of potentially of advocating the use of pesticides on public land.
Okay. Motion's clear. Any comments or questions on that? You didn't hear it? Yeah, get your microphone one more time. There we go.
Therefore, be it resolved that public health staff investigate the pros and cons of public use of pesticides for mitigating tick population.
Okay, all of that's clear? All in favor? Carried. Can I have a motion to receive the presentation? Moved by Pearson, seconded by Vanderbeek. All in favor? Can I have a motion to thank Susan once again for her 31-year career? Moved by? Second by? All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And having said that, I don't know where I am anymore. Approved, we did all of that. Okay. So we on Lyme disease are 8.1, feasibility of peanut restrictions in city facilities. Before I do, let me have Dr. Tran. Is there anything to add to your report? No? Okay. Councillor Marula. Oh, sorry. Councillor Johnson. Should look before I leap.
Thank you. And through you to Dr. Chan, thank you very much for this report. I remember there was a resident that stood up here and was asking that, and I think the focus was actually on the Tim Hortons field. And I believe that there was actually a Human Rights Tribunal decision that came down about selling peanuts in the Tim Hortons. Would you care to just give us the Coles notes on that decision?
Dr. Tran.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're correct. A citizen following our, I guess, decision not to do it across city did take us to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, and the number of city staff, including myself, testified at the two-day hearing because mediation was not successful. At the end, we recently had a ruling that ruled in our favor, that confirmed that the actions we are currently taking in terms of accommodating individuals, accommodation on an individual basis was sufficient in addition to the stock epinephrine that we provide. So we are not required to remove peanut products from our city facility, but I have our legal solicitor here if there's any other more specific legal questions you'd like to ask.
Thank you, and through you to Dr. Chan. So basically what the Human Rights Tribunal said was that the City of Hamilton are taking proactive means through EpiPen, separating the individual, putting up the signs. But I also remember there was one key part in there that said that the city really doesn't have a whole lot of control over the public coming into these facilities carrying that very product.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think one of the things that we raised, and it was at least certainly not challenged by the Human Rights Tribunal, is the ability to enforce and control and to make it risk-free, because you could, even if you banned it, quote unquote, people can still find ways to bring them in.
Right. So if we put up signs that say that this is a peanut-free facility because we're not selling peanut products or nut products, we can't guarantee that it's in fact nut-free because the public may be bringing that product into their knapsacks or purses, their pockets, whatever. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct, and I had a verbal nod. I had a nod from our legal solicitor on that one as well.
Thank you, and if the legal is here, I'd like to ask just off how much this two-day event cost. So I'd get back to me on that, please, on offline. Because we originally brought this forward because we thought that it would be a great idea. The schools are enforcing it. They do have a different jurisdiction than we do. They're allowed to go through the knapsacks. They're allowed to go through the lockers. And once the whole population of that school is informed, then chances of any contamination are very minimal. When you're looking at a public facility, that's an ongoing issue because different people from different places can be coming into our facilities from all over the city, and the contamination can still always be there, so it's never a 100% guarantee. So I really appreciate, Dr. Chan, the fact that we tried. I see the recommendation is just to put it up there that, peanut allergy, if you have one, we have our EpiPen, we're prepared if you have any issues. And those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitehead?
Actually, I want to just thank staff. I think it's a pretty balanced report, and it's not just the peanut allergy, whether you have a dairy allergy or any other kind of allergy. We do identify at least a couple of them where we post those, we're recommending to post that signage for the protection of those that may have issues with those particular products. At some point in life, when you're looking at the general population, not everything is guaranteed, but the best we can do is educate and provide as much information to those that may be impacted by these allergies. But there's no way that we can completely bubble wrap those individuals, but we do owe it to them to ensure that they understand areas where they might be taking risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to thank staff for the report as well. As you can probably recall, I brought forward this the motion for feasibility, and the media asked me a good question. They said, well, are you upset that it came back not supporting it? I said, well, no, because that was the purpose of asking for the feasibility study. So I'm not disappointed. Actually, I'm relieved in many ways because it would have been, we would have subjected the community to, I think, somewhat of an unfair scenario. But having said that, I think that as we move forward, it's important that we recognize that when we do these studies, that we put them, so if we save them in the proper place, because we never know as variables change down the road, we may want to revisit a lot of these feasibility studies. And having said that, as everyone recognizes, there's a tendency right now to have far more allergies than we ever did historically. Why that is I guess, is another question, but it may become more and more problematic down the road, and it's good to know that we've done our homework on this file, and I appreciate your time.
Good point. Thank you. All right, so I'm seeing full support for the recommendation. So a motion to move the report, moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. All in favor? Carried. On the next item, it's the expanded use of naloxone on Hamilton Fire vehicles. Michelle Baird is here to speak to the report. The report is before us. Anything to add, Michelle?
No, there's nothing to add to the report. This report is simply the ministry announced in January that we have the ability now to provide naloxone to fire services for their use in response as well as potentially for their own employees.
Great, thank you. Councillor Jackson on the report. All right, I hit it twice. Okay, that's the third time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I must have a raw finger or something. It's just not working.
Daryl McLean, who
I'm going to switch
system,
fingers.
is still here with us, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I just want to congratulate Local 288. I had chatted months ago with President Stan Double of the Firefighters Association. Just a casual chit-chat about the opportunity, if it ever presented itself and legislatively was approved, that naloxone could possibly be available to our firefighters and, of course, police as well. And the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, I think, approved it a couple of months ago this year to allow municipalities and Board of Health to approve it if the fire and police services wanted to administer. And with, I'm sure, Chief Cunliffe and the management's support, I just want to congratulate our firefighters, our some 600 to 700 firefighters who are willing and available to want to administer this important drug at the most opportune times to save a life potentially. And this will be going over and above their normal rescue operations that they do, primarily, of course, with fire and other emergency situations, and at no cost at all to the municipality because the province is providing the kits. So again, to Chief Cunliffe and President Stan Double, I just want to congratulate them and wholeheartedly support getting on with this. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly want to echo those comments. We also have the Good Samaritan legislation as well that provides some coverage to what is the fire department or any other individual that exercises good faith in trying to facilitate and saving a life. I just read recently that the Halton Police have now endorsed and will be carrying the pen as well. I just hope that our police services start arriving to the same conclusion that if they can save one life, it's worth the exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Johnson.
I just want to apologize to Dr. Tran. I think I've been hanging around with the mayor too long and I've screwed up names, so I'm really sorry.
And when you did
Thanks
that,
again, Dr. Tran. Good job.
You did that one all by yourself. Thank you very much. So if I could, Deputy Mayor, I'm not sure who it is now, is it? Because you came up as Deputy Mayor on the screen, Councillor Jackson. I don't know. Did you have special pull? Would you put on a request so I can turn it over to you for a moment? Yeah. Here we go. Take the chair. So I do appreciate that fire is going to be doing this administering, and you know what the sad part is that we've seen an increased spike in opioid deaths just recently, and you know, it's very concerning. I think we need all hands on deck to try and avoid loss of life for individuals out there and to protect our first responders. So I'm really delighted to see the firefighters take this on as something that they can have for themselves in case they come into contact with any of those noxious drugs, which are deadly, and hopefully save some lives out there in the broader community, folks that are now playing Russian roulette in many respects from street drugs that they're taking that have no idea what they're in them, and if it happens to be fentanyl or purple heroin, I'm hearing now, they're really taking life into their own hands and putting themselves at risk. So hopefully we can prevent that and get them to care. And as was pointed out, I'm hoping that we can equally convince the police service to do the same for the same reasons. I think it's a positive step that will help make a difference. But there's much more that we need to do to deal with this crisis that's happening right across the country. I think it's not getting any better; it's getting worse. And I think it needs it has to have a multitude of responses, and this is certainly one of them. So I appreciate that effort. I'll take the chair back, Councillor, and thank you all. And on the recommendation, moved by Councillor Jackson with enthusiasm, seconded by Councillor Ferguson with enthusiasm. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. On general information, item 11.1, correspondence from the Assistant Deputy Minister of Long-Term Care. Moved to receive by Donna Skelly, seconded by Councillor Whitehead. All in favor? Carried. And a motion to receive the correspondence from the Deputy Minister on Long-Term Care for Program Services and Accountability. Moved by Skelly, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? Any other business items? Hearing none, a motion to adjourn would be appropriate. Moved by Skelly, seconded by Marula. All in favor? Carried. Can I remind all members of council that when you come to the meeting, put your phones on silence. 2 phones went off while I was here. It's not necessary. You need to turn them off. That would be very helpful. And, well, we got good turnout today. I'm not